And now, it's too early for me to get into this right now, but when we start talking about our Mount St. Helens Grand Canyon work, where one of these strata layers with the little stuff on the top and the big stuff on the little stuff on the bottom and the big stuff on top formed after Mount St. Helens just in a short amount of time, well, that, punctuated equilibrium should actually be explained by that, because that's what's most observable rather than well, anyways, let me keep going here. Okay, that's point 2. Point 1, modern conception of evolution uses the mechanism of natural selection. Point 2, punctuated equilibrium disproves that there can be gradualist evolution. Point 3, here's where it gets interesting. Natural selection absolutely requires a gradualist evolution, since punctuated species changes are not observed in the lab, in nature, and even in philosophical attempts to explain it. So gradualist evolution has to be tossed out. Okay, but natural selection relies on gradualist evolution. So what are we on, point 4 here? So evolution can't make use of natural selection, and thus evolution is a mechanism-less theory, and that's worse than even the most deplorable pseudoscience found, well, anywhere. Putting that all more simply, natural selection was viewed as being the mechanism of evolution, but it's been disproven from being the possible mechanism for evolution. So all we've got left is evolution with no known mechanism. So there is no theory. It's just all a bunch of ideas. It's not even based on science or observations or anything. So anyway, I told you this show would get us into all the evolutionary issues. This is the big show on evolution. I've done several, but this is the one. So anyway, what we have found so far is the world consists of these code-carrying creatures, and humans are more or less similar to some, and there's one that we have to be most similar to. Now that's what is observable. What is not observable are species changing into other species. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a good thing to say is not observable. This is just how we find ourselves in the world. If you just analyze the raw world as it is, pure observational evidence, this is what you find. These code-carrying creatures with similarities and dissimilarities, and different levels being more or less similar to each other. Now, here's the issue. What evolutionists do, well, there's two ways to think of, let me just say this first. There's two ways to think of where these code-carrying creatures come from. One is they come from each other. That's evolution. Or two, they don't come from each other. They come from some designer that's made them. That's the creationist thesis. There's many different versions of evolution and creationism, but in general, those are the two branches. Now, the creationist view does not hold that species change into each other. Okay, so they are very tightly connected to what is observable in the empirical world. Now, on the other hand, the evolutionist camp demands that these code-carrying creatures change into one another. Sorry, these code-carrying species change into one another, which is specifically not observable in the empirical world. So it's philosophy. So they're going beyond the observable evidence, beyond the empirical world, to assert a philosophy of where the creatures and the different species, the code-carrying beings, come from. So to this point, and we have to say more about this, obviously, but from this rudimentary way we've described it here, the evolutionist perspective has gone wildly beyond what is observable, and the creationist camp is not. Now, what is a possible reason why? Now, I don't think this is why the evolutionists started doing it, but what's a reason that they could say that the code-carrying creatures have come from each other? And that is because they say in the fossil record, things we can trace back into the past, and things started very, very simple, got much, much more complex. So therefore, we have reason to think that first there was simplicity and things got more and more complex. And the way to describe that in their take is not to say that, okay, that designer we just got done referring to, put them on Earth at different times. No, instead they came from one another. Okay, so it's purely wild philosophical addition to what is empirically observed. But let's leave that aside for a second. Let's study first this fossil record. This is all the evolutionists would have to save them, to save this wild philosophical addition to what is empirically observed, as I've just got done outlining. If they don't have a way to trace back somehow this increasing complexity, they've got nothing. I think they've got nothing anyways. Okay, because you need to see the species changing into one another, and that is exactly what is not observed in the fossil record. Punctuated equilibrium is a philosophy. Well, yeah, it is a philosophy. Is a philosophy invented by the evolutionists, which specifically addresses how they don't see the gradual changes. They don't see any change from one to the other. It just all of a sudden there's a new species on the block, and they can't trace the changing. Okay, now these are really important points. The way we're breaking it down here is really getting to the issue. Okay, now we need to attack both sides. I'm attacking the evolutionist side a little bit more. We're going to attack both creationist side too, because I just want to get to the bottom of it. All right, and I think the big thing we've pointed out here is, I mean, the evolutionists, they've got the media, mass media on their side. Okay, they've got, I mean, there's so much talk. The Atheist Experience in Austin, a show I really like. It's on YouTube and Freethinker's YouTube channel, and it's all over. It's a huge show. I mean, they sit there and say, you know, that the religious right has the control of the mass media. You know, you got to know what you're talking about before you make a claim like that. If they did, then why is the Discovery Channel dominated by discussions of, you know, from the evolutionists? I mean, clearly, I don't even need to argue this point and waste our time doing this. Clearly, mass media, National Geographic Channel, everywhere, is dominated by the Darwinist perspective. So anyway, I'm not going to go into that now. That's a whole other issue. Let's keep moving. So what we're saying here is that it's often stated that the evolutionists have so much clout, and they've got the mass media at their fingertips. They've got so much press, and they're on the news and all this kind of stuff, and they act like the creationists are absolute ignoramuses. And it's not even, it's a distortion. The truth is that there's evidence on both sides that needs to be addressed. I, of course, think the evolutionists, what they have is not evidence, but that has to be shown, because chromosome 2 fusion does appear at first glance to be something significant, until you point it out, as we're gradually doing here today. And I mean, the evolutionists don't point out that stuff about chlorophyll that I was just talking about. They don't point out the issue about how we don't see species change into one another, and all their thermodynamical theories about species change don't make any sense either. I mean, that they're just basically on a one-track bias, and it's not totally their fault. There's huge pressure and conformity in academia to. I mean, you find a biologist who questions the mechanism of natural selection, which is, I mean, they all should, because for reasons we just stated about punctuated equilibrium. You find one of them questioning Darwinism, and you'll see if they can keep their job. See, it's called the destruction of free speech. That what they say is, oh no, you don't agree with the experts, the expert opinion, so you're some amateur. That's a clever way of saying we don't want advancement, we don't want freedom of speech and thought, and this is some kind of dictatorship of thought. So let's discuss the fossil record, because if there is no way to show that, well, I already explained it. The evolutionists better have some reason for us to think that there's see, what they introduce is a progression. We started off simple, and things started changing into other things. Species started changing into species, and so forth. And there's a progression of increased complexity, and that's how we got here. Okay, now I've already pointed out all the non-empirical issues there, so they better have some reason to assert that's true, because if not, we're going to go right back to the other position where we don't assert, we follow the empirical path, and we don't assert that species change into other species, okay, which is in accord with the observable. So let's explore the fossil record here and see what they have to say. Now, one thing I want to just make clear is I'm not discussing transitional fossils here. There's been a big stink that creationists have made. This is one of the problems with creationism. Some of the theorization that they give. They make a big deal out of transitional fossils, which is not a good idea. Okay, because basically what that is you find one fossil and then another fossil of two different, horse and deer. Then you try to find what's in between, and you call it the transitional fossil. Now, I'm not going to discuss this for more than just about half of a minute here. But the problem with that is I just reject anybody discussing anything about transitional fossils due to the fact that how do you know it's a transitional fossil?